Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. Welcome listeners to another exciting episode of Extrology, where we explore the stories of extraordinary individuals who inspire, connect and open up life's endless possibilities. Today we have a phenomenal guest, Jae Chalfin. Jae is the visionary founder of Sports New Media, a groundbreaking sports and technology-based social media agency that helped sports brands, athletes and associations manage, moderate and monetize their social presence. With proprietary technology and over 100 prestigious clients, including the likes of Rooney, Ferdinand and FIFA, Jae's influence is monumental. He's also the mastermind behind GiveMeSport's, the world's #1 sports publisher on Facebook, boasting 26 million fans and reaching over 100 million fans monthly across all digital platforms. His achievements include creating global partnerships with major organisations like FIFA, UEFA, the NBA and Facebook, and successfully taking his company public on the Toronto Stock Exchange in 2017. In today's episode, we'll dive deep into Jae's upbringing, his entrepreneurial inspirations, and the pivotal moments that shaped his journey. From starting as a shipping broker to founding a leading social media sports agency, Jae's story is filled with challenges, key learnings, and remarkable successes. He'll share his insights on overcoming obstacles, the evolution from startup to IPO, and what keeps him motivated. Stay tuned for an inspiring conversation packed with invaluable advice for entrepreneurs with a dream, reflections on success, and Jae's vision for the future. So what's the story behind the story? Without further ado, let's get into it. Jae Chalfin, welcome to Extrology. Great to have you here as our guest today. And I think importantly for listeners, it's always good to start with some context and some kind of background, early influences stuff. So could you start by telling us a bit about your upbringing and what was it like growing up? Where did you spend most of your early years?
Yeah, so I grew up in Sheffield, and those early formative years were the 80s. That kind of gives you indications to my age. And but that meant I was a teenager in the 90s, which, I still believe is the greatest decade ever. My parents were very involved, and we just went everywhere with them. My dad was, working class guy who did very well throughout my lifetime, and he would always say that he felt he'd made my life too easy, and I wasn't hungry enough. Where my mum was the complete opposite. She said, I could do anything I wanted, which is a great mix because I wanted to prove my dad wrong and I wanted to prove my mum right. But I just remember being around adults and being very comfortable being around adults. And, my dad would take me he was into his cars. So we'd go to car dealerships at the weekend and he'd chat to the sales guys and the engineers. And I didn't go to the football. I just spent my time, listening to him chat away to these older people, and I just love being in that environment. Look, don't get me wrong, I played computer games and had fun, but that was looking back, I just remember that as part of my early years. I ended up in the school. I started off in school in Sheffield, ended up in a boarding school in Cheltenham, and it was just landing in a different planet almost when I got dropped off there, and it taught me to be independent, and some of my best friends are still those guys that I ended up going to school with. So yeah, quite an interesting background.
What was it about? Interesting your comment on that car showroom kind of sales experience, if you like. What was it? You remember it would appear had quite an influence, quite an influential part in your early life. What did you love about it?
I think it was just the communication and just seeing how you talk to people and how you try to create those relationships and form those connections. I would literally, when I was a little bit older, I would take myself off to, there was a car dealership called Lancaster Europers. It was the Mercedes dealership in Sheffield. And I would come back obviously from school and spend my holidays, in Sheffield. My dad's office was there. And I would take myself off to the car dealership and I would sit and talk to this guy called Dave Colbeck, who was the sales guy. And he must have thought, who's this 15-year-old guy that like keeps popping in to come and say hello? I don't know. It just felt very natural. I just hung out with older people, especially in a business environment, because I spent all my time in my dad's office. If I wasn't at school, that's where I was.
Well, the fact that you still recall is, what did you used to talk to him about?
I have no idea. I mean, he was Dave Colbeck, you mean, the sales guy?
Yeah.
He was an ex-Royal Marine. So I remember lots of stories about, his whole experience and, getting into the Marines. And I guess it was the art of storytelling, right? Which is very key to being successful in anything in life, just being able to have those conversations and capture people's imagination. I really like that. And I guess we'll come on to how I got into, it probably led me into getting into media and that content and the storytelling side of things. But yeah, I have no idea to this day. And as I said, I'd love to know what he thought. if he's out there, get in touch, what he thought when I used to rock up and, come sit and have a coffee with him.
Well, it inevitably begs the question as to any key figures or experiences during your childhood that inspired you to think about business and entrepreneurship. But it sounds like only your father, but even Dave's influence was apparent at a relatively early stage.
Yeah, I mean, that's an easy question. It was my parents, because actually my mum and dad, certainly a little later on with one of his businesses, they worked together. So, and in fact, pretty much everyone in my immediate family had their own business or a little side hustle. No one worked a kind of a traditional 9 to 5. I just didn't know anybody that kind of had a corporate job or had a profession. Everybody had their own businesses. We call them entrepreneurs now, I suppose. But my dad in the 80s, he had a contract cleaning business. He then got into the mobile phone industry in the kind of 90s. My mum got heavily involved in helping him with that business. And I guess you'd say, what the VCs would identify as like that perfect co-founder team. They were it. They complemented each other, brilliantly. And, whether it was in the back of the car, whether it was around the lunch table. And as I mentioned, I spent all my holidays in my dad's various offices as he became more successful. Probably, again, annoying most of the people that worked for him there. But it was all business. And it wasn't until I was a lot older and a friend, I mean, probably maybe even late teens, and a friend came around to lunch, and we were also quite a combative family. We'd get into it around the table, and because mum and dad had that relationship, they're married, but also business partners. So, and I remember my friend saying, that's not normal, by the way, in a nice way. He was just saying, it's very different to what he experienced, I guess, growing up. So yeah, I just lived in this world of business talk and everything that you can imagine that entailed.
Do you think it was that, even subliminally, but perhaps it was that constantly being in that sort of environment that initially sparked your interest in business? And how do you think that interest has evolved in those early years? How it evolved over time?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that was the case. I often say if my parents maybe had been, doctors, and I saw the amazing things they did in saving lives or, whatever their profession would have been, I'm sure that would have been an influence, especially if you saw in you kind of got some enjoyment out of that yourself, if you felt that was something you were leaning towards. But yeah, I saw how successful my dad became, which obviously is quite inspiring. I mean, the one thing I always said that I never truly saw was they kept the hard part away from us, right? As kids, they did. When I first started doing my own thing, I was like, I never really quite understood this side of it, which is when things go wrong, and which invariably they do, 5 times a day. But I still do remember some of the challenges that they went through in certain points within businesses, transitioning from a contract cleaning business to a mobile phone business. I was aware of them, but and I can see that there was always a solution to be found if you just wanted to put your mind to it, I suppose.
I think that's if I consistently talking with founders through the course of Extrology, that sense of things going wrong, to your point, 5 times a day, it's a consistent theme. But yet, to your point, it's the one thing that I think when people embark upon this entrepreneurial journey that rarely gets talked about from the get-go, that things will go wrong. This is going to be a roller coaster ride, all cliches apply. I think that's, so I think to your point, and understandably as parents, we kind of naturally want to protect our children from the very worst that life has to present. I think it's a natural instinct, but yeah, I think it's a consistent theme amongst those entrepreneurs with whom I've engaged that problems are part of the roller coaster. The journey that is the entrepreneurial life is a tough one. Leaving school, what were your thoughts of sort of 16, 18? Were you thinking actually that there's sort of career choices that I'm going to make, or what sort of thought patterns were you facing at that pivotal age as to what the future would hold at sort of 18, 21?
So my dad still had his business, his mobile phone business. He kind of sold it in the, I guess, late 90s. And he was adamant that I wasn't coming into his company. He was kind of, self-made man, and I think he'd seen his friends. So that was not an option. He actually went and sold it around the same time as well. So I had to, go and figure out what I wanted to do. And I think he was right in many instances, because I don't think I was hungry enough at that point. And we'd had, I pretty much didn't go without growing up. So, I still needed some time to figure out. So I went to university and got a degree. And actually, that's where I first got involved in my first kind of entrepreneurial endeavor outside of buying Ralph Lauren shirts from America when the dollar was 2 to 1 and bringing them back and selling them to my mates, the little arbitrage. But that was when I got involved in my first web startup. This was 2000, early 2000s, the boom and bust years. And we built this platform that was a student platform, helped first year students buy books from the second year students. And that was the first time I really kind of put some ideas together, and they kind of came alive. That's this kind of creativity process, more than just, as I said, trying to emulate my dad and be a bit of a wheeler dealer or whatever the phrase is. This was like, oh, you can actually create something, and I guess that's where it really started.
And that's really insightful. That was a web-based proposition. It sounds like a terrific idea, actually. What do you think you learned from that experience?
Well, actually, it did more that. So it was. I always say it was an early version of Amazon, or Amazon was about at that point.
Yeah.
It also had like a message board on it. So I would say it was like the early Facebook, and we digitized all the discount vouchers for all the bars, clubs, and restaurants. So it was also an early Groupon. But with all things, and you'll often hear this line from VCs and investors, being too early is almost worse than being too late, right? It's all about timing. So I would say, on hindsight, I learned that lesson very well, and I just learned that, and I wasn't a coder, I wasn't an engineer. I still can't write any code. So I guess it gave me a lot of confidence to say, well, you can kind of get into these businesses without necessarily needing what was required. And I was always very good at finding what I didn't have as a skill set, and I've done that consistently with co-founders. I'm sure probably we'll start to talk about later on.
So before, sort of post university, before you start embarking on this entrepreneurial journey you've enjoyed, you started your career as a shipping broker. Is that right? I think as I read, and I'm fascinated to understand what led you to choose that path initially.
So obviously the first startup failed miserably, and very fortunately I stayed on at university. I didn't think I was Mark Zuckerberg, and thought, well, I'll just kick this all in and focus on the business. I used to read, and still do, like, I only read biographies, or predominantly I only read biographies, and I love documentaries. I'm fascinated about what makes people tick, and the psychology, and the successes, the failures, just those life stories. And about that time I read a book called Ari, and it was about a Greek ship owner known as Aristotle Onassis. And his story, for anyone who doesn't know it, is incredible. He started from nothing. Literally, he had to escape his home country, Smyrna. I think it was Turkey that had invaded at that time. I can't remember if it was around the 30s or 20s, may even been earlier, to be honest. And he ended up getting on a boat, leaving his family behind. He was a young man at the time and ended up in Argentina. And he became the richest man in the world. At one point, he owned Monte Carlo. So I read this book and I thought, "Oh, that sounds interesting. Sounds exciting." So I didn't own any ships. Obviously, I didn't have any family that were in that industry. So I figured out there was this thing called shipbroking. At that time, it was kind of pre-internet in any real capacity, and I remember flicking through the yellow pages, found all these brokers in London, wrote to everyone. I got rejected from everyone but this small little broker, called J.O. Plowright. And they offered me a chance. I don't think they offered me a job, to be honest. I think I was like, come in, just do some stuff and we'll see if you're any good. And so, yeah, that was it.
So what were the key lessons, do you think, that you learned from that early career choice you made and that perhaps have stuck with you throughout your entrepreneurial journey?
So I realized I was an entrepreneur in working for somebody else. I still had that itch, albeit I didn't, I enjoyed working in the industry, but I quickly realized that this particular broker, that there wasn't much room for promotion. It was, there's a few old boys in there, and I think within 6 months I was already looking around. There was a guy I knew. I didn't know well. He was a lot older than me. He's called Sir Tony Gallagher. Very successful, incredibly wealthy property developer. And my only connection was that his daughter went to school with my sister. So I managed to get his mobile number and I phoned him and I said, "I think you know this guy called Jeremy Palin who works at this broker, called Arrow." And I thought, let's give it a go. And he picked up the phone and spoke to him. I'd met him a couple of times, I guess, and he kind of went, "Yeah, okay, fine." Put the phone down. Within a week or so, I was in front of Jeremy Palin having an interview and I got the job. I went to go and work for Arrow. I was a Panamax broker, which basically is the largest vessel that would fit through the Panama Canal. I had no experience even from working at the previous broker because it was a very different area of expertise. And there was 4 partners. Jeremy Palin, who now runs the whole of Arrow, became very successful. I could just see how good he was at his job, and even more so, he would. My days were 12 hours long, 8 while 8. And the worst part of my day was doing this market report at the end of the day. And he would call in, or I would have to call him at 8 o'clock in the evening to get just 3 words that would describe, what he felt the sentiment of the market was that day. And he took forever, annoyingly, because I'd just be sat on the phone listening to him to come up with these 3 words. And he was an incredible leader. So the lessons I learned, I'd say, were find the fast-moving water. Always get into something that, it's happening, right? There's something going on. And in this case, it was getting into a bigger broker. If you don't ask, you don't get. And I've always been very good at that. I guess I got that from my dad. And a great leader, leads from the front. I guess that's what I learned really within that period of I guess that was my early formative kind of development within my career at that point.
And I mean, fascinated to understand how you go from shipping broking to be the founder of Sports New Media, first and foremost, the social media agency that you founded back in 2007, I think, something along those sorts of timelines.
Correct, yeah.
What was the inspiration behind starting a social media sports agency? I guess, is there a specific moment or idea that sparked the venture?
So actually, the agency was kind of was born out of necessity because the original dream was to build a football website, and I did just that. It was called Give Me Football, and I knew nothing about digital media other than I felt that it was a vertical that could be disrupted, having not been disrupted, like other forms of media and entertainment. I had a love for music, but file sharing and Apple iTunes and all of that had happened. So
albeit just starting. I'm just thinking in terms of timescales. I guess I'm trying to reflect back my own scratchy memory as to when these things started to come on stream. But you're kind of, from a music streaming perspective, I guess we're post Napster, aren't we? At that sort of time, maybe just about. But music is changing and being disruptive massively. But even building a football website, I'm trying to think what football websites there might even have been at that time. And nothing springs immediately to mind. I'm sure there were. You'd have had some competition, I suspect. But what made you, tell us about the football website, first of all. What made you decide, why football? And why therefore did you feel a website was the right path?
So there were the legacy platforms were there. They were, Sky Sports had a website, skysports.com, BBC, they were probably the big dominant players. And I just saw that really they'd taken their print model and made it digital. I also wasn't particularly enthused with the content. I wanted to create content for a younger audience, for myself. I wanted to have an opinion. And again, I was never what I would call like your on the terrace sports fan, but I loved the storytelling around it. Again, documentaries. There's not one sporting documentary that I haven't watched. So I just wanted to create a business to be able to just do something a little different. But I had no real plan. Build it and they will come. They certainly didn't, and hence the necessity to kind of build what was Sports New Media was actually the name of the holding company. And then we kind of became known in the industry, and we just got into doing different things to kind of support Give Me Football, I suppose. And Sports New Media as an agency was where we would try to create revenue, and we could be a little bit more nimble and work with partners in more tried and tested ways, I suppose.
Was there a specific moment that sparked the venture? And to your point, it was perhaps initially as an opportunity to help finance Give Me Football, but was there a real spark that made you think this is the direction of travel?
Yeah, I mean, what I realised is in building the website is that I was too late, because the legacy players had kind of come in, content management systems. There was no digital innovation to be had. Everything was, I guess, they built their almost, you'd call it a moat with SEO. So there was no way that we could come in and really, get into that digital media landscape. But what did happen was that this thing called Facebook was starting to make some noise. And at the time, we had friends that were involved in this thing called the Facebook Developers Garage. It was this unofficial kind of like geeky techie fan club. And in fact, Mark Zuckerberg actually came to one of these events. And so there was a lot of excitement around this platform, and we saw friends just like create things, and they were getting traction. And I remember thinking, God, what's our play? And, we started to, I knew a few agents, just through obviously the sports website. And I knew Rio Ferdinand's agent. And we kind of approached them and said, look, and he was the perfect player or sports personality at that time, because he was very open-minded, and, he worked with, he understood the power of his brand. And so he was keen to jump in. And Facebook opened up their APIs back in the day, and they wanted this kind of community to start really building stuff. We knew the senior guys at Facebook. We suddenly became a problem solver for them, because we started to manage athletes. They invariably would have big, like super powerful agents phoning them, like, take this page down, or we don't like what you're doing. And many athletes didn't want to be in this platform. And so we would then go away and build a solution to their problem. And one example would be talking to Wayne Rooney's agent, and he's like, look, we're not going anywhere near this platform because he's just going to get abused. It's just like open field day with Man City fans, right? So we went, okay, well, hang on. So we went away and we went, I think we can build a moderation tool. We think we can build this bit of tech that will pull all these offensive words and phrases. And so we, go back, knock on the door of the agent and say, look, actually, we just built this solution. He's like, what do you mean? I said, well, we can pull all fine. Okay, let's do it. And that was it. We just kind of, I always there's a great saying, right? If in the land of the blind, the man with the one eye is king. And like, we didn't really know what we were doing. We were just there. Like, we were just there, and we wanted to be part of this again, fast moving waters, right? And we just jumped in.
And I guess, therefore, you mentioned some of the challenges that you encountered in the early days, and how perhaps you overcome just being innovative, solving problems, providing solutions, getting around things. I mean, is there a perhaps, though, on a particular mistake that you made along the way, the sort of key learnings that you had from those experiences?
There was only one challenge we ever faced, and that was running out of money. Everything else were just opportunities and problems to be solved. And I need to do a shout out for my long suffering co-founder, my ex-business partner Nick Thane. We'd always be running out of money because we'd always be pushing the business really hard. And at this point, we were trying to spin up a sports website. We had a sports media agency building tech over here, promising all these things that we could do for big important people. I do remember. I remember one day sitting down with him and going, "We've got payroll again, and I just don't know how we're going to do it." And he came back like a day later. He's like, "I've sorted it. I figured it out." He said, "I found a hairdressing salon and they needed a website building, so I said we're going to do it." So we were suddenly right. Stop building over here. We've now got a proper job, and we're going to have to build this hairdressing website for this client, which is, this is going to get us through. I'm just always found the solution, especially in those early days, right, when you're hand to mouth.
Yeah. There's bootstrapping and there's bootstrapping, right? But you really are bootstrapping and doing by any means necessary to survive.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine as well the funding landscape at that particular time. You've got people are seeing the success that Facebook is starting to gather some momentum. So I'd imagine you'd have prospective investors who want to be part of that world, of part of that kind of evolution of the digitization, kind of socialization of the web, and all that would impart. But at the same time, also a lack of understanding, the sort of the old money, if you like, old way of looking at things. Where's your revenue? Where's your profitability? What are your projections? You start to think, this is a model I don't understand. How do you monetize? I guess you would have seen some of that conflict as well, perhaps, given the timescales given the time at which this was going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, in the early days, the ecosystem didn't exist like it does now. I mean, it's night and day. You had a couple of big VCs like Index and Excel and Bouldertons maybe. They certainly weren't backing a couple of kids in an office trying to build a digital website, which it was an ad-based model. I think once we got close to Facebook, and we were very close. I mean, our developers went out to San Francisco and sat in their office. Facebook brought us in during the Olympics, the London Olympics, and actually, I'm not sure if I actually say this, but because it was done very discreetly, they paid us to build a lot of tech for all of the athletes that were involved in the London Olympics, because the IOC was very concerned about them tripping over any rights issues with content and all of those things. So we got very close to the platform, and that gave us obviously a lot of credibility. And so, yes, we suddenly found ourselves, and the times had moved on, as you mentioned, the excitement around social media and all of the things that were starting to come about, and the valuation. If you remember, right, even my mum was talking about it. Have you just heard about this kid from university? I said, yes, Mum. Yeah. So it was. It created a lot of hype, and we again we rode that pretty well, and that did allow us to get our kind of second line of funding from a proper investor, and it was a strategic investor in the name of IMG, and they didn't have really any idea as to what we did, and we're very open about that. But they kind of went, well, you're kind of like us, but in the social media world. So, maybe we should invest in you. And again, timing perfect. They were trying to find a buyer at the time. Eventually got acquired by a big US agency called Endeavor. So, yeah, look, luck and timing is a key factor. And many people will have told you that, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's back to your early comment about being too early sometimes. Timing is everything. But I also think that you're at a really interesting point in time whereby so much of what we understood traditionally to be true in terms of business models and funding, and also was being ripped up and reassessed and rewritten in many ways. And to your point, you had this brave new world where all of a sudden crazy valuations were coming around for businesses like Facebook, and people were kind of, old money was saying, well, this thing doesn't make any money. How can you possibly? But the reach and the engagement was incredible. You yourself work with some of the biggest names and organisations in sports. How did you manage to secure such high profile clients and partnerships? Given, to your point, it was a little bit, I'm not going to be disingenuous and refer to it as the Wild West, but it was such a brave new world, if you like. How are you able to secure those sort of high profile clients and partnerships that you were making?
Yeah, I think, as I said, we knew what we were talking about when many others didn't. We were managing our own business through Facebook, because kind of Give Me Football was starting. We started to learn so much that we were now taking all those learnings and bringing it into our own business. Then managing all of these clients, then getting paid by Facebook to help other federations, IOC. We work with UEFA, with FIFA. We started building technology. So we just started to build all these really huge competitive advantages, right, for us as a company. And then having Facebook obviously validate us, and then, getting Rio Ferdinand helped us get Wayne Rooney. So it was, going back to where we started our conversation, it was just that if I draw a line back, it was going to that Facebook developers garage. That was where everything started, and we just continued to push it forward from there. But yeah, I guess, and you raised a good point. It was a bit wild, wild west. I guess we were the only ones that could educate. We could just sit with confidence and say, this is like, by this time everybody had realized that they had to get on this thing. It was moving quick, and brands were like, listen, we don't care about what you're worried about, Wayne Rooney. You have to be on here, because if we're sponsoring you and there's a young kid coming up and he's got millions of fans or whatever the case may be, and everybody understands now the power of social media. But we have to draft these contracts with these players as social media agent contracts. And yes, we didn't know how to monetize it. We went, well, hang on, he's got this page, he's got this huge audience, and you can see all this engagement, and we know how to make things more engaging. Let's go out and speak to brands on their behalf. And so yeah, a lot of it was, you took old models. Obviously, everybody knew how advertising worked in the traditional sense of the word, but there was a new language, and I think we just could talk that language and make everybody feel very comfortable. Of which they hated it. People forget, everybody hated these platforms, because whether you're the IOC or whether you were SkySports.com, you were giving everything away to them for free. And of course, we know where we are today with that.
And the reach of Give Me Sport. To your point, I don't know what kind of. If you took the BBC as an example, I think I heard the other night that. Now, I can't remember if it was 8 million or 11 million, so it flies in the face of what I'm about to say. I can't substantiate my story, but I was thinking as to the viewing figures for the England-Slovakia game, something like 8 million, might have been 11 million. Give Me Sport is reaching over 100 million fans per month. So to your point, the reach, the visibility that you're affording these players, sports stars, celebrities, and brands is way beyond the reach that any of our traditional media would have been able to enjoy. So, incredible reach.
Yeah, it was, I remember in the early days, we struggled to get like 100 people to read a football article, which would someone would spend a lot of time and energy, writing this article. And there was one standout moment very early on in Facebook. Started off as profile pages, and then they created these fan pages, so that brands could come in, basically, was the whole intention of that. And I remember seeing a page, I can't remember exactly the name of it. It was something along the lines of a donut with no hole, or it might have been a donut with a hole, I don't know. And this thing had 1 million fans on it, or likes, or whatever it was. And I sat there and I was going, Okay. This, this is crazy. And we were, again, we jumped in. I remember when we hit a peak of like 26 million fans on our Facebook page, or on a collection of pages. And at that point, within Facebook, we were bigger than Sky Sports, ESPN, you name, all of the top 5 kind of big international. We were bigger than all of them. And then by then, we'd understood how to then leverage that social media audience traffic through our content, through everything that we built, through knowing how to use the APIs, through knowing all the rules of engagement, what content worked, what content didn't. We made a lot of mistakes, remember clickbait. Well, we were the kings of clickbait in order to drive all this traffic to GiveMeSport's. And yeah, the numbers were huge, and it happened, very slowly and all of a sudden, right, as everyone says. But we were just kind of thrust into this world. And I remember actually, a moment where we were bigger than SkySports.com, and Nick and I we always needed an enemy. We were very combative, as you are as a young kind of upstart. You hated the legacy guys that were there and bigger than you, and then you hated the guys that were next to you and coming up next to you, and I remember we did a press release to announce to the world that we'd found some metric and some number that would allow us to say we were bigger than Sky Sports. And many years later, when we were looking to sell the business, I was speaking to the head of acquisition at Sky Sports, and she reminded me of this fact about this press release and told us to very politely go away. Now, whether they were ever going to buy the business, I'll never know. But, that was just how we operated, rightly or wrongly. That's just how we were, I guess.
What about master of understatement now with my next point, but taking a company from literally 2 guys in a room talking about building a website for a hairdresser to make payroll, to having a company that's publicly listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange is an incredible, it's a phenomenal achievement. Can you describe what that journey was like?
So, I can talk you through it, kind of how the milestones from a kind of, I guess, from a funding perspective, which I think is quite relevant. More so, I could talk forever as to, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about some of the more finer points. But so look, as you said, we bootstrapped initially, and it was pretty much a 10-year journey.
Which I think is a really important point. Sorry to interrupt, Jay. I think it's a really important point because all too often we hear of the overnight success. They're few and far between. To your point, it's a 10-year journey, right? There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears going into this.
Listen, I remember year 9. I remember having a walk with my wife, long-suffering wife. We walked around Primrose Hill, and I was like, I just don't think we're going to make it. 9 years, and we're going to hit another problem and another challenge. We were so embedded with Facebook, and that was both an amazing advantage, but also a curse. Right? You all heard when they pulled the plugs out of the SEO model, and businesses just kind of like we were riding that so hard all the time. But very early on, we got a form of, I call it funding. We got something called we won this ability to get an EFG, and this was back in the financial crisis. So very early on, an EFG was a government-backed loan. The government would underwrite 70% of the risk with the banks, and there was a mandate for the banks, and NatWest being the bank that we got our EFG from, to get this money into the hands of the right people, just to get the economy growing again. And there's a guy who we met again through the kind of the startup network, right? Everyone was, listen, there's this money going around. Well, to an entrepreneur, like that's the greatest news ever. You're like, right, you're sat at this guy's desk within like 30 seconds, right? And so he's a great guy, a guy called Tom Butterworth. He's now at HSBC, and he helped us get this money, and he had to get this money into the entrepreneur's hands, and we ticked every box. We were young, we invested our own sweat equity, we didn't have our own assets, and so it was like tick, tick, tick. Here's $500,000. We didn't figure out particularly well how the fact that this needed to be paid back, so that put us under a lot of pressure again. Right, we were on to the next the next speed on the running machine. so we got this EFG, which is a bank loan basically. We then, when the timing was right and we started to really, get some noise, and we were, in the eye of the storm with Facebook as it was growing in the right direction, we got a strategic investment from IMG, a big sports kind of media talent corporation, distribution rights, all of these things, if you're not familiar with them. And they weren't willing to invest in equity. They gave us a convertible loan note. Like, here's a little bit of money. I think it was £800,000, which gave us, our next. But that was a really good period of the business. And within 12 months, we were knocking on their door again, and they gave us 2 million in equity and converted the 800K as well. Then from memory, we as I said to you, like year 9, I'm still talking to my wife about, I just don't think we're gonna survive. And we managed to convince somebody. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I managed to convince someone to give us $500,000 to get us across the line with the public listing. And yeah, April 2017, we officially became a public company on the Toronto Stock Exchange, which is a small cap. And our market cap was around, we did a reverse takeover. I won't bore you with the details, but it was a machine learning business. And we tried to sell the business, had a couple of people interested, but we thought, let's go again. Like, let's have another look at this and keep on with the journey. And to be honest, I think the other deals were like earnouts as well. So, and we listed at, I think it was around about 250 million Canadian, which is not the same value as a dollar, market cap. And it was a fight from day one to that point. Everything. We always made it very difficult. I think my business partner and I we just loved that. If things weren't going wrong, we didn't feel comfortable. We always liked our backs against the wall, and there was no one that was going to win, better than us.
Do you remember how you felt that day of the listing, when the bell goes and there you are, you're a public company? How did that feel?
Not as I expected. A wise man once said to me, "Is the journey's better than the arrival." And there's certain bits of advice in life that someone can tell you, but it makes no sense, and you just don't get any understanding. I think there's a part in Good Will Hunting with Matt Damon and Robin Williams, and there's a moment where they're trying to connect with each other, and I think Robin Williams says something to the words of effect, just because I've read Huckleberry Finn, I'll never understand what it's like to be that person, And this is exactly true. I'd often heard the journey's better than the arrival in various, narratives. And I raced through life, right, to get to this finish line. And I don't know what I was expecting, but and there is no finish line, right, at the end of the day. So it was a bit of a head spin. And yeah, left me pondering. I don't know.
How do you have to motivate yourself? Is that a challenge? Because you've gone from all of a sudden, never quite. I think it's a bit of a misnomer to assume that you are, whenever you're running your own business. I think for people perhaps who've never done it, often assume that it must be great because you're in charge, right? Nobody's telling you what to do. You're in command. In my experience, you're always on the hook to someone, whether it's a customer that won't pay, or a customer that pays late, or a customer that has a problem, or it's a bank, it's an investor. There are all sorts of stakeholders within your business ecosystem that you are in some way, shape or form beholden to. You have a choice as to how you engage with that relationship, but ultimately there are all sorts of moving parts that you have to work with. And then you IPO, and you've now got, very public, you've arguably a far greater number of stakeholders to which you are responsible. So it's a different dynamic. Does that shift culture as well? I guess what does that feel? What does that cultural shift feel like? Does it feel any different? And how do you motivate yourself in the brave new world?
Yeah, I would say there's, and this is I'm going to use. There's a guy called Jim Keller. In fact, I watched this clip on YouTube not that long ago, and he sums it up perfectly. He talks about how, in order to have the most optimal amount of productivity, you need, this balance between order and chaos. an early stage startup is very chaotic, but all businesses will just levitate naturally towards order. I always remember kind of when it got to around about maybe 50 people in the business, things do change. The dynamics of the business change. And obviously that requires you to change with them. Your management style and politics creep into the business. So people often talk about, you can, you're running your own business, you can do what you want, but there's many different variations and forms of running your own business. And as you say, there are always people you're beholden to, whether it's investors, the team around you, and becoming a public company, you've got a board that, and boards have agendas. But I guess I like that. I liked, there's, you can always look back with nostalgic rose tinted glasses about, your favorite periods, and invariably that would be when you're doing really well. I did enjoy all of the periods and the stages of development and growth. I just wish probably I lived in the moments more so, rather than, as I said, running towards that finish line, just chasing that carrot, knowing that actually that wasn't what it was all about.
Looking back, would you do anything differently if you could start over again?
Oh, that's a hard question. And I think I probably just suggested it in the previous one. I think just slow down a little bit and enjoy the process. Enjoy maybe you can't pat yourself on the back and say, look, you're doing well. Don't worry, guys. Maybe that's just not the way it works, I suppose. But maybe just enjoy the moments, because I never did. You always want more. You're always chasing. You always want the next deal. So yeah, maybe that would be it. But that's a hard question. I don't know.
What about motivation now, Jay? I mean, you're a young man. You've achieved great things, but there's lots more to come, right? So what motivates you now?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and also trying to read about it from more of an academic landscape, or whether it's listening to podcasts. And there's a number of podcasts, right, that answer this question, But I would say it's curiosity and willingness. I think they're very soft words, or more. They're certainly softer than like the equivalent passion and willpower. You'd hear more of as a form of motivation. But I like those words because they seem to have more longevity to them, and I think that's exactly what's needed within business. And I listen. I know one thing: if you put a plate of biscuits in front of me, my willpower doesn't last that long. So I like to frame it around that. And I've always been like incredibly curious. Like I'll just sit, read, listen. Like even coming, and having the opportunity to meet you when we did, that was driven by, I guess, there's some motivation there, obviously, but curiosity and what can I get out of that conversation? And there are a few things that I still remember from that conversation. And I used one of your phrases just yesterday when I was having a lunch with someone from JP Morgan, and I was wanting to understand what were his challenges. Like what keeps you up at night? And so yeah, I'd say just continually learning, right?
But that curiosity, I think it's a wonderful word. I love that, curiosity and willingness, and that's not one I've heard before, but it resonates. Perhaps from a personal perspective, but curiosity and willingness, a great phrase, and it almost informs. If we go right back to the beginning of our conversation, and 15-year-old Jae Chalfin sat in a car dealership asking questions of the sales team, natural sort of curiosity informs, I suspect, very much who you are, and has been a source of motivation for quite some time. Perhaps it's only when we get a chance to pause and reflect back you get to understand that. But I guess that curiosity then leads into the future. What does the future look like for you now? What excites you about the future in particular?
Well, so I'm actually we've actually talked about my previous business. I'm currently in a new business right now, and it's in a very different field. It's called Car Credible. Basically, a platform to help customers who are in an existing car loan try and get into a better deal. But that has not been the success that I would have liked. It's been going for a few years. I'm just in the middle of selling it, but more out of necessity, just to find a landing for the business. but that's a whole nother podcast, right? Talking about that one. But I'm very excited about what's next, and I'm very comfortable not knowing what's next, which I think probably I jumped into the last business out of fear of not doing anything. So we'll see. I'm not sure. And as I said, I feel relatively comfortable about that. The thing is that, and I often used to think that eventually this will all slow down, but it won't. We live in such a transient time, and the pace of change, and obviously, AI, and I certainly don't want to be sat on the sidelines. So I will be somewhere very shortly, I'm sure.
I think that's really informative. I think that one of the things that's often fascinated me is, and I'm now just about to butcher fundamental human psychology, but we crave certainty. It's a natural, in varying degrees, but natural kind of default human position, which we crave certainty. And yet, every single one of us faces uncertainty every day. So we all have this sort of almost slightly misguided belief when we wake up in the morning, when we know what's happening in our day. So we kid ourselves that, we've got appointments, work schedules, whatever it may be. We all think, I've got to be here, and I've got to be doing this at this time, and this is what's going to happen, and I'm going to eat my lunch at this time, blah, blah, blah. But actually, every single one of us faces uncertainty, guaranteed uncertainty every single day. None of us truly know what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes because we can't predict the future. So I think once you get comfortable with that, it then gets to be quite exciting. That actually, to your point, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but that perhaps you feel you maybe rushed into the next one, if you like, because you wanted to know what you wanted, that certainty. That's very understandable. But actually, you get to a point now where you go, well, uncertainty is a thing for us all, right? You get really comfortable with it, and then you start to realise the endless possibilities that uncertainty might bring. Fascinated in your perspective, you mentioned technology, AI in particular. Given your experience of the sports and social media landscape, I wonder how you see that evolving. Have you got any sort of, despite my premise around uncertainty, I'm going to get into the world of predictions. But how do you see the sort of sports and social media landscape evolving over the next few years, perhaps?
Yeah, we were always on the fringes of sport. We were coming in as the disruptor. We weren't what I'd call the royalty of sport. We weren't sitting, front row seats at the football games, or in the, we were always the kind of the scrappy guys. And sport is very unique, or it certainly has been for a very long time, because it's all about that live moment. Once that live moment has happened, there's stories and narratives around the edges, whether you're looking at the celebrity side or the documentary narrative that I mentioned. But it was always about that live moment, and I think a lot of what we were trying to disrupt, 10 years ago, is I start to see some of those foundations now finally somewhat crumbling. And I think that sport is facing some real challenges. Maybe it's having its moment that music did, back in the peer-to-peer file sharing days, where it just, that business model was just ruined and ripped up. And it is largely in part trying to keep up with the continual disruption that technology brings. And I think you can see that within that kind of that younger audience, and they have somewhat cut the cord because they want their content on their own terms. And my son's still quite young, but I know many of my friends, their kids just aren't going to sit and watch, day in, day out, 90 minutes of a football game. And I think that's a big challenge for sport to understand how to overcome that. You're seeing the traditional associations and federations now getting challenged by Middle Eastern money. OTT there is no OTT in the form of a Netflix for sports, so I think sport has a lot to figure out, and it's something that, maybe I jump back into that. Who knows? Because I think I have a few answers, but yeah, it's going to be interesting for sport. And what we do know is that none of this is slowing down. So they've got some figures. There's some things to figure out still, for sure, and there's a lot of excitement around that.
I was very fortunate to have a guest on an earlier episode of Extrology, Ben Lavender, who's the creator of the BBC iPlayer. And I remember a conversation. It took Ben about 3 years to get that through the various committees and channels at the BBC to get it to become a proposition, and ultimately was described as the person who saved the BBC by the then chairman. I think it was Greg Dyke. But I remember Ben saying, recounting a conversation he had at the BBC as to the sort of principles of the iPlayer and what it would do. And this particular gentleman having said to him, look, goodness me, Ben, what utter nonsense. Why on earth would everybody knows that EastEnders is on at 7:30 on a Tuesday and Thursday. So people sit down to watch it. Why on earth would you want to watch EastEnders on a Friday afternoon at 4:00? You just wouldn't do that. It'll never work. It'll never catch on. So that's sort of, to your point, if we look now in the on-demand world in which we find ourselves, we want to watch what we want to watch when we want to watch it. And that's a totally different landscape in just 20 years. It's totally changed. And I think to your point as to where sport goes or social media goes and any of these technologies, where AI takes, I think it's a fascinating time to be alive and very exciting. That uncertainty, I think, it creates a lot of fear for people because of that uncertainty, but also creates vast opportunity. And I think that's where it gets to be really exciting. So coming back to entrepreneurship, what advice would you give an entrepreneur with a dream, inevitably facing numerous obstacles? But what advice might you share to an entrepreneur out there who's thinking of getting something started?
I've tried to avoid cliches for most of this podcast, but I'm going to struggle here, I suppose.
I guess they're cliches for a reason, right?
Yeah. I mean, just get going. I mean, look, I've started so many businesses, and I had very little background or knowledge or experience within them, which is sometimes great, sometimes not so good, and I've experienced both of those things, obviously. And if the worst that happens is you fail, then I can tell you from my recent startup, I've learned so much within the failure, and there's clearly many failings in my previous one. So that has obviously been mentioned on countless podcasts and interviews around entrepreneurship. Can I add this a little bit above and beyond that? There is always a way. There's always an alternative way, and I've shown some examples in that, like our funding route. I spoke with a very well-known VC, and he was like, "I've never heard any UK startup take that route." So it's just that it's harder, right? We all know where the VCs are, and I've seen a lot of people waste a lot of time with VCs. And they'll always see you, and they'll never really tell you quite what they're thinking. And so, do try and find those alternative routes. And there's some great angels out there, and maybe try and raise money. And if you do need to, by the way, never raise money if you don't need to. It's never that simple. But as maybe some motivational advice, find the open door. If it's not open, knock on it. If they don't hear you, kick it down. That's the only thing that I was any good at, and the rest, as I said, I just brought amazing people around me to fill in where I was where I wasn't any good, and I do believe that you're if you think of all the things I've said, like if I didn't have that great network around me, we wouldn't have been at those events and found like the start of Facebook. If you walk into the gym and you don't know what you're doing, just go and find the guy that's big and muscly and just buy him a coffee and say, listen, tell me how this happens, because clearly he knows what he's doing. And yeah, I always just find you want to find the smartest people and try and convince them to come along with you on the journey, I suppose.
If you could go back and give advice to a 21-year-old Jae Chalfin, what would you say?
It's going to be all right. I'm sure someone said that before, but yeah, it's going to be all right. You the anguish that you experience, the agony and the ecstasy, and it's never that bad. It's never that bad. But again, maybe I needed that at that moment in time. So maybe I wouldn't go back and say that to that 20-year-old Jay. It's going to be bad. Get out there and figure it out, because So, but yeah, it's just take a breath. And, you spend a lot of time in your head as a founder. And we all know, certainly recently, where people are a little bit more open-minded and what mental health is. But so, yeah, just take a breath, and everything will hopefully work out. And if it doesn't, right, wow, well done. So you've done more than most.
So what does success mean to you, Jay? And how perhaps has your definition of success evolved over the years?
I don't think it has. I think success is winning. And I can't change that. As much, I'd love to have changed it at certain points of my career and made it into something else, made it about being really nice and, looking after people. But yeah, success is still about winning. And what winning means can be different things to different people, but I don't think it has really changed. And, you still got to you've got to get fired up, and you've got to want that. As going back to my dad, like you've got to have that hunger, as he said. Otherwise, it will be a very difficult path to take.
You talked a lot about, your whole story embodies the spirit of inspiration and connection. You've talked about the value of connection, the connections you've made. You've talked about the importance you've placed around community and relationships in achieving entrepreneurial success. I guess in terms of possibilities, which is something that I always like to reflect on, what message would you like to leave our listeners with about the endless possibilities that are available to them?
I mean, yeah, it's if you just get out there and you start, firstly you've got to back yourself, right, and believe in something, and in doing so, I mean, I can just remember myself, the amount of trainers I wore out running around London. In fact, for most of my previous startup, I had this kind of like a field jacket. It was like, one of those green army jackets, but kind of a nice one with two pockets. My phone was in there, my pens were in there, my keys were in there, my earphones were in there. I had a backpack. I had this black rucksack. I had my laptop in, my notepads, and everything else I needed. And I just kept walking around London trying to find, whether it's to agencies or agents, media businesses and competitors, friends, and I just kept hitting the pavement. And like, if I can do it, right, anyone I guess can, because I wasn't particularly academic. I didn't have 3A levels. And I've seen it. I've seen successes in so many different shapes and sizes, whether it's my dad or whether it's Aristotle or Onassis. And that's what I learned. And look, it's hard. So there's no getting away from that part, but it's as long as you're willing to put that effort in. And I don't think you always need to have like a passion. You don't need to be like diehard passionate about it. Curiosity, willingness, and just back yourself and say, right, let's give it a go. It's as simple as that.
I think you make a really good point about passion. You often hear people utter the phrase, follow your passion. What are you passionate about? I think there are clearly some people, there's for whom that's something they work out relatively early on. I'm struck by, my friend's daughter's just got married. Her husband is a vet. He's wanted to be a vet since he was 12 years old. That is, he loves animals. That's all he's ever wanted to do. Most people don't get to be that lucky in terms of having that understanding and clarity as to this is my journey. But in my experience, what I found is if you find something that you're good at, whatever that may be, then actually being good at something is oftentimes what makes you passionate about it, because you like the feeling that being good at it affords you. So, or if you at least by being good at it, you start to see some traction, you start to see some momentum, you start to see that you can win at this. I think that's when the passion starts to fly. I'm sure with GiveMeSport, there were times when, to your point, there were huge hurdles for you to overcome. If you go back to your agency, you talk about, will we make payroll? Oh, we found a website. We're going to build a website for the hairdresser. So you found this. You'll just keep going because you could see that there's some wins to be had. And I think that's a really good point you make about passion, because oftentimes that's something that comes to us as a consequence of finding things we're good at. And I mean, there's so many messages to take away here, not least, I love that. Keep hitting the pavement. That's a great message. Just got to keep doing it. And it's the overnight success, 10 years, right? It's blood, sweat and tears that makes that happen. And I think that's not a message that gets shared often enough. We read all too often about the overnight success.
I mean, as I said, all the pavements and all the meetings and all the people I met, I've never met anybody that achieved overnight success.
No.
So I'm sure somebody has, but I've never met them.
No, I think you're right. Well, look, Jae, this has been a real pleasure. I really, really appreciate you coming on to Extrology and sharing your experiences with listeners. It's been a real pleasure. Like I say, I've really enjoyed it. So much to take away, so much of real value. And whatever next, I wish you continued success. I think there's some really exciting journeys ahead for you. Really appreciate all you've shared with us today. Some great learning, some great takeaways, and all the very best to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I've loved it. So thanks for asking me to come on and share my story, which is generally what I love doing.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jae. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to today's Extrology podcast. I really appreciate your audience and ears. If you've enjoyed it, then why not hop onto iTunes and give us a review? I'd really appreciate anything that you might have to say. Any feedback always gratefully received, and look forward to hosting you next time. See you soon. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.